Hello lovely people, welcome to my Dewithon Wrap Up.
Doobie 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 doo. Doobie 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 Sophie Vlogs.
As you all know, if you watch my Dewithon TBR video, I have spent March reading Welsh books in honour of Dewithon, which is named after Dewithon, St David. What I thought I would do with this is I'm going to be recording at the end of every week, so you can see what I've read each week, and then this will be a compilation of Sophie's featured through March. So it's the end of the first week of March and I've read 2 books for Dewithon. First one was on my Kindle, was Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. I am so pleased to have read my first Diana Wynne Jones. Howl's Moving Castle tells the story of Sophie, who works in a hat shop. She is the oldest of 3 daughters, so she expects nothing exciting to happen to her. One day the Wicked Witch of the Waste casts a spell on her that makes her age to be an old woman, and Sophie finds this oddly freeing, and it allows her to do things that she previously never would have done. Along the way she meets the wizard Howl and his moving castle, and shenanigans ensue. Obviously this is really famous for being a Studio Ghibli movie, and I had previously seen the film, and I found that an interesting element of the reading. I think when something takes a life of its own as a film, especially because the Ghibli film is different in many ways, it was kind of like this mix of this delightful, comforting familiarity, because as I was reading it I could see the stuff from the film and that sort of thing, but equally the book is different enough that it had its own delights. So there's a lot more Welsh presence in the book, of these places that Howl's Moving Castle can open up to. One of them is Wales, which was really delightful. I really enjoyed some of the words used, and names chosen and stuff like that were really interesting from that side of it. And then also, as the book progresses, some of the ways in which the everything comes together at the end is again quite different from the film. So that was like this delightful thing of like this comfort and this intrigue and this interest. I also found Diana Wynne Jones' writing style so easy to read. Like, I read this book in like 2 days. I just devoured it because it did that delightful thing where chapters sort of give you like, in which, da 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 da. So you get like a little tease at the start of everything. And I just found the way that everything was like phrased and described, it just felt really classic, and I just found it a really delightful read. I think the characters are so compelling as well, because Howl is a character who is almost like walking contradiction. He is selfish and all of these things, but also like he is kind in his own way. And similarly, Sophie has such an interesting journey of going from being so timid and confined and stuff like this, and then having this spell put on her in many ways frees her from some of these expectations that she'd put upon herself as like the eldest of 3 sisters and that sort of thing, and it allows her to behave in a way that is much more true to herself and allows her to find who she is. And I find Sophie's arc in this so compelling, and it is an arc that is present in the film, but I think because you get Sophie's inner thoughts and you get to really see the world through her perspective, I found that sort of message of finding yourself and being determined and that sort of thing, like I just found that came across like much clearer for me. All in all, I would say that I have thoroughly enjoyed my first Diana Wynne Jones. I know that this is the first of a trilogy. I don't know how related they are. I would definitely be interested in continuing the trilogy and seeing what it's like, but on the whole I had a really fun time with this. Another book that I also had a really fun time with was Good Dawson by Aneirin. I mentioned in my TBR video that this is the earliest written work in a native language from the British Isles that we have, and technically it is telling the tale of a battle that happened up in Scotland just south of Edinburgh, Catrice, but it's written in an early form of Welsh, which is the language that was spoken there at the time, which is why I've included it for Dewithon. I had a really great time reading this. I recognise that this will not be for everyone, because number one, like, ancient poetry is not for everyone. This is very much like taking the form of like elegies, because it was this band of like 300 warriors that went to this battle. They were vastly outnumbered, loads of them were slain, and this is like a poem that is created to like memorialise them, and it's elegies to the different soldiers that fell in this clash. 2 things. Number one, my ideal method of consuming this book would be if Paul Bettany, in character as Chaucer from The Knight's Tale, read this aloud, because if you've seen the film, he has this way of, like, before the jousts, and also I do know that I'm massively conflating two different time periods, I recognise that, but as like a performance thing, him in that character in that film has this way of, like, speaking to the crowd before jousts in this delightful, like, cadence and performance. And I think what it is that makes me want that is the performance aspect of this, because this is a poem that was it's written down, but it is meant to be spoken aloud, and I loved that aspect. I genuinely did recite some of these for my partner, who, this is his book, he's read this, so, like, he loved it, but I was just like, there were just occasional times where I was like, I just need to speak this out loud and perform it, which was great. And many of the, like, aspects of this tie into that. So when you have these poems that are meant to be performed, there's, like, aspects of repetition that work really well when you're performing them. One thing that I found really interesting is the recurrence of the number 3, because 3 is such an important number in Celtic cultures. It is explicitly repeated in this. There's, like, one stanza which I read aloud to my partner, which was, like, listing different 3s, you know, like, in the battle. And then also, like, sometimes you get, like, a run of 3 where each elegy ends with the same line. So they're about different warriors and they say different things, but they always end on the same line. And it was really interesting when you had, like, a run of those, because it made me think about, why is this repetition happening now? Are these people who are of similar standings? That sort of thing. Also really enjoyed thinking about the types of animal metaphors that are in this. Like, one that I noticed was, like, arse, bear, like, bears were in here a lot, but, you know, different types of animals that sort of tie into this particular culture's view of certain animals. A text that this kind of reminded me of was Alice Oswald's Memorial. So Memorial is a poem by the poet Alice Oswald that is approaching the Iliad, with the idea that the Iliad was originally an epic poem that was memorialising a real clash that happened. So she strips away all the narrative from the Iliad, and it's like this poetic retelling that's just listing the different soldiers who fall. So it is very much drawing on all of those aspects that are in the Iliad, the different metaphors that are used to describe when different soldiers die, but it takes away all of the plot. And that reminded me of this, or rather this reminded me of that, I don't know which way around is the right way to say it, because this doesn't have a driving narrative that is, like, setting it within this clash and this narrative structure, but it does have these individuals and these different metaphors that are used to describe individuals, whether that is their prowess in battle, the types of things that they were celebrated for during their life, like this person might be a poet, this person might be a fearsome warrior who is leaving widows behind, and this sort of thing, but in that way where it's like all of these stanzas are memorializing people. And so I just had that connection in my head while reading this, even though they're both from very different, like, traditions and that sort of thing. I just felt that, like, connection between them. On the whole, I gave this one 5 stars. I gave Howl's Moving Castle 5 stars as well. It's been a great start to Dewithon, just because I think this is so interesting, and I think, like, especially for this idea of, like, foundational literature from place, like, I'm so pleased to have read this. I don't know, I found it really, really great, and I had a really lovely time reading it. My Welsh is not very good, so I did read some of the Welsh aloud, or I attempted to, so that I could try and, like, piece together, you know, with my very limited vocab, because this is obviously a translation, so it has the dual text, so I was trying at times to sort of use my limited Welsh to sort of understand what the original, like, wording is, but I'm not very good, so I didn't do that too much. But on the whole, really enjoyed this, super fab, gave me a lot to think about. Another week done, more books to talk about, starting with Welsh Legends and Myths, 80 Myths and Legends from Across Wales by Graham Watkins. This was perfectly fine. I gave this a 3 out of 5 stars. Graham Watkins is essentially retelling a bunch of Welsh myths and legends. I will say that this lent more on sort of the legend side of things. There were a lot more stories that were sort of rooted in actual history, but then, like, here are sort of, like, the folktale element that is told about them, or, like, the slightly bit that has gone down in legend, that sort of thing. I thought this was perfectly fine. I think one thing is that because I am really interested in myths and legends, I have read quite a number of collections of them by now, specifically ones that are focused on usually like the Celtic Isles and stuff like this. So there was just a lot of this that I already knew, and when you already know a story, sometimes it comes down to how the story is told. So Graham Watkins tells this in quite a straightforward manner, which can be a very good thing because it makes the stories really accessible, it makes them really easy to read. It's just because I was already familiar with a lot of them, I think if it had been told in like a way where the telling of it was really lovely, then that would have made me be a little bit more engaged, I think. But I did have a fun time reading this, and I do think it's like a perfectly good collection. I will say, I don't know if this is self-published or published in a small print. I would just like to flag there were quite a lot of proofing errors here, and part of my job is to be a proofreader, which you might think would make me really tough on it. It's the opposite. It is so easy to miss things, and I understand that. I'm just flagging that, like, if that's something that annoys you, then maybe, you know, pick up a different collection. After that is Oversea Under Stone, which is the first book in Susan Cooper's The Dark is Rising sequence. This is a middle grade series that was written in the 1960s that is drawing on Arthurian mythology. The first book is set in Cornwall. These three kids, their family goes on holiday to Cornwall to stay with their great uncle Merry, and while they're staying in this house they discover this map, and they become aware that there are other people who are after the map who may or may not be trustworthy, and so they're using this map to try and discover something that's tied to the story of King Arthur. I had a fun time with this. I feel like this first book is it reminds me of a lot of other fantasy things from a similar time, slightly like, almost like a bit like Fantastic Five kind of vibes, because one thing I really liked about it is, in order to sort of follow the map and to find the thing, there's a lot of things that involve the kids really having to like use knowledge and like be very logical about problem solving, and that was like a really nice aspect. It wasn't just like, oh, we just follow the line on the map and we find the thing. It was like, okay, no, you have to get to this point and then you have to see how the shadow from this stone falls and all of this sort of thing, and I just thought that that was like a really lovely, like, active problem solving angle. I included this in Dewithon because I thought it was drawing upon a lot of Welsh mythology. I think that might come slightly later in the series because this one is very much set in Cornwall, and so it's sort of drawing on like the Cornish connections of King Arthur. I will be interested to see if it sort of becomes a bit of a larger scale as the series goes on, because the whole point here is like the dark is rising, and this first episode kind of felt a bit like, you know, we're problem solving, but it wasn't so. It was sort of like following the steps in a puzzle, whereas I'm interested to see that as this series goes on, if this threat is going to become larger and larger and larger, if that's going to like amp up action and stuff like this. I don't know, it was an interesting read for sure. I will definitely continue with the series. I don't think I read any further than the first book when I read this as a kid. I think that might be as far as I got, or maybe just into the start of the second book. But I'm very interested to see where it goes, because I know this is a series that a lot of people like. I would say after this first book I had a perfectly fun time. I occasionally got like a little frustrated because there are a few moments where it was just like, if you guys would just not blindly trust all of these people, things would be better. I don't know, but I had a fun time reading it and I'm definitely intrigued. The final book I want to talk about for my Dewithon Wrap Up is A History of Wales by John Davies. This is a bit of a beast. It's just over 700 pages of Welsh history. I am really glad I read it. It has taken me most of the month to do so. I think that this is really just extremely thorough. It starts way back in like early history, like Stone Age, Bronze Age, that type of thing. This is the revised edition, so it has an extra chapter at the end, because originally it went up to 1979. This has a extra chapter at the end that is 1979 onwards, from up until when this was published, that is really looking at like the establishment of the Senate and stuff like that. This is a word that could have negative connotations, but I mean it in a positive way. It's an extremely dense book because it is just absolutely packed full of information. Like, I cannot imagine how long it took to write this book, because all of the topics covered within are just done so thoroughly. There are a lot of like additional things like maps and stuff in this to show you different things depending on what he's talking about. There are so many like stats and figures and dates and things like that. It's definitely a non-fiction book that takes time. The reason my partner has this is because he studied at university. He used extracts of it within some of his essays and stuff like that, and I can really see why. because it's just so packed full of info. Some people are going to find this like way too heavy and dense and that sort of thing to get through, and I can really see how like you might have that if you're reading this just for fun. Personally, I found that really useful because, as I said in my TBR video, I felt like I had pockets of knowledge. So, you know, like I read a book that was all about the history of Welsh language, so whenever he was covering things to do with developments in the history of Welsh language, I already felt quite solid on those because I was like, yes, I have read these. And then there were certain like pockets of history that I knew, but really I had no idea of like the sense of it as like an overarching whole. Like what are just like your important political developments, like your important like historical happenings, but also like, you know, let's look at religion, let's look at language, let's look at industry, let's look at all of these things like writing and poetry and that sort of thing. Like he just does cover like everything. Very much in that way of like, this is very much like a zoomed out focus on the place as a whole. So whilst there were lots of names in this that are names that like I'm familiar with and I have like heard of before, he's not giving you like a sense of these people as individuals, because if you want a sense of these people as individuals, like read a biography of them, read a book that is focused on them or that particular moment. He really is just trying to give you this like overarching sweeping view of like, okay, well, this fed into this, which fed into this, which fed into this, like this is the zoomed out picture, rather than necessarily like, you're not going to get like a huge sense of like individuals and like what drove them, what their backgrounds are, stuff like this, but you will understand the things that they did that are relevant to like the shaping of Welsh history as a whole. So I think that's everything I have to say on this. It was super duper thorough and I really enjoyed my time reading it. Definitely one that I think I'm going to be sitting with for a while, and I will absolutely not remember everything that I read in this for sure. I already have forgotten probably half of it, but very pleased I read it, and I understand why it is like so critically well received. That's everything I wanted to talk about for my Dewithon Wrap Up. I would love to hear if you took part in Dewithon. What did you read? What did you love? Do let me know. Also, as I said in my TBR video, if you have recommendations for your favourite like Welsh books, books about Wales, that sort of thing, I would also love to hear them, because I will file them away for next year's Dewithon. Once again, I've had like a really lovely time taking part. I have read like a bit of a mix and a range of things, but that's how I like to do it, and it's been really interesting, you know, different aspects of Welsh identity and Welsh cultural heritage and stuff like that that have been explored. So once again, it's been a cracking Dewithon. I've had a lovely time. I hope you have too, and I will see you next time for something different.